1000 AD, Vikings landed in Newfoundland, lands Ox Meadows. The Vikings from Iceland, who settled in Greenland around 1000 years ago, also traveled to Labrador and Newfoundland. Their settlement at Land's Ox Meadows is now recognized as a World Heritage Site. 1215, signing of Magna Carta, Great Charter of Freedoms in England. Together, these uphold an 800-year-old tradition of ordered liberty for Canadians, tracing back to the signing of the Magna Carta, the Great Charter of Freedoms in England in 1215. 1497, John Cabot explored Canada's east coast for England. European exploration took off in 1497 with John Cabot's expedition, during which he became the first to map Canada's east coast. 1534, Jacques Cartier claimed Canada for France. Between 1534 and 1542, Jacques Cartier undertook 3 Atlantic voyages, claiming the land for King Francis I of France. 1604, the Acadians, descendants of French colonists, came to Canada. The Acadians are descendants of French settlers who began establishing communities in the present-day maritime provinces in 1604. 1608, Samuel de Champlain founded Quebec City. In 1608, Champlain established a fortress at what is now Quebec City. 1610, the English settlement begins in Canada. John Cabot, an Italian who moved to England, was the first to map Canada's Atlantic coast, reaching Newfoundland or Cape Breton Island in 1497 and claiming the land for England. However, English settlement began only in 1610. 1670, Hudson's Bay Company founded. In 1670, King Charles II of England granted the Hudson's Bay Company exclusive trading rights over the area draining into Hudson Bay. 1690, Count Frontenac refused to surrender Quebec to the English. In 1690, Count Frontenac refused to surrender Quebec to the English, responding, "My only reply will be from the mouths of my cannons." 1701, peace was made between the French and the Iroquois. Champlain allied with the Algonquin, Montagnais, and Huron, who were longtime rivals of the Iroquois Confederacy. This led to conflicts between the Iroquois and the French for a century, until peace was reached in 1701. 1755 to 1763, deportation of the Acadians by the British, also known as Great Upheaval. Between 1755 and 1763, during the British-French War, over 2/3 of the Acadians were deported in what became known as the Great Upheaval. Despite this, they endured and preserved their unique identity. 1758, First Represented Assembly was elected in Halifax. In 1758, Halifax, Nova Scotia, held the first elected representative assembly. 1759, Battle of the Plains of Abraham. In 1759, the British defeated the French at the Battle of the Plains of Abraham in Quebec City, ending France's empire in America. 1763, Treaty of Paris. France gave up Canada to Britain. In 1763, the Treaty of Paris officially ended the 7 Years' War, and France ceded Canada and its territories to Great Britain. 1763, Royal Proclamation formalized the recognition of Indigenous land right in Canada. Aboriginal and treaty rights are part of Canada's Constitution. These rights were first recognized in 1763 by King George III's Royal Proclamation, which laid the foundation for treaty negotiations, though some treaties were not always honored. 1774, Quebec Act of 1774, passed by the British Parliament. To govern the French Roman Catholic majority more effectively, the British Parliament passed the Quebec Act of 1774. 1775, Sir Guy Carleton defended Quebec against an American military invasion. Sir Guy Carleton, as governor of Quebec, defended the Canadians' rights, repelled an American invasion in 1775, and oversaw Loyalist migration to Nova Scotia and Quebec in 1782 to 1783. 1776, American Revolution began. Many Loyalists moved to Canada. In 1776, over 40,000 Loyalists, supporters of the Crown, fled the American Revolution to settle in Nova Scotia and Quebec. Joseph Brant led many Loyalist Mohawks into Canada. 1791, Constitutional Act divided Canada into Upper and Lower Canada. The Constitutional Act of 1791 split the province of Quebec into Upper Canada, later Ontario, predominantly Loyalist, Protestant, and English-speaking, and Lower Canada, later Quebec, mainly Catholic and French-speaking. 1793, City of York was founded by Lieutenant Colonel John Graves Simcoe. Lieutenant Colonel John Graves Simcoe was the first Lieutenant Governor of Upper Canada and the founder of the City of York, now known as Toronto. 1812 to 1814, the U.S.-Canada War. In June 1812, the United States attempted to conquer Canada, but their invasion ended in defeat. By 1814, the American effort had failed, and the War of 1812 helped establish the current Canada-US border, ensuring Canada's independence from the United States. 1813, Laura Secord made a 30-kilometer journey on foot to warn of an American attack. In 1813, Laura Secord, a pioneer wife and mother of 5, bravely walked 19 miles to warn Lieutenant James Fitzgibbon of an impending American attack, contributing to the victory at the Battle of Beaver Dams. She is celebrated as a heroine. 1832, the Montreal Stock Exchange opened. The first financial institutions were established in the late 18th and early 19th centuries, with the Montreal Stock Exchange opening in 1832. 1833, British Parliament abolished slavery throughout the Empire. In 1807, the British Parliament banned the slave trade, and in 1833, it abolished slavery across the British Empire. 1837 to 1838, rebellions in Upper and Lower Canada. In the 1830s, reformers in Upper and Lower Canada felt that progress toward democracy was too slow. Some even advocated adopting American Republican values or joining the U.S. armed rebellions in 1837 and 1838 near Montreal and Toronto failed due to a lack of public support, and the rebels were defeated by British troops and Canadian volunteers. Many rebels were hanged or exiled, though some later returned to Canada. 1840, Act of Union. In 1840, Upper and Lower Canada were united into the Province of Canada. Reformers like Sir Louis Hippolyte LaFontaine, Robert Baldwin, and Joseph Howe in Nova Scotia worked with British governors to establish responsible government. 1849, Sir Louis Hippolyte LaFontaine became first leader of a responsible government. In 1849, Sir Louis Hippolyte LaFontaine, a strong advocate for French language rights, became the first head of a responsible government in Canada. 1857, Queen Victoria chose Ottawa as the capital of Canada. In 1857, Queen Victoria selected Ottawa, situated on the Ottawa River, as the capital of Canada. She was the great-great-grandmother of Queen Elizabeth II. 1867, Confederation. From 1864 to 1867, representatives from Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, and the Province of Canada, with British support, worked to create a new country. These leaders, known as the Fathers of Confederation, established the Dominion of Canada on July 1, 1867, marking the birth of the nation we know today. 1867, British North America Act came into effect. In 1867, the British Parliament passed the British North America Act. 1867, Sir John A. Macdonald became Canada's first Prime Minister. In 1867, Sir John Alexander Macdonald, a father of Confederation, became Canada's first Prime Minister. Born in Scotland on January 11, 1815, he moved to Upper Canada as a child, became a lawyer in Kingston, Ontario, and was known for his political skill and vibrant personality. January 11th is recognized as Sir John A. Macdonald Day, and his portrait appears on the $10 bill. 1870, Louis Riel leads the Red River Rebellion. In 1870, Louis Riel fled to the United States, and Canada created a new province, Manitoba. Riel is regarded by many as a hero and a defender of Métis rights, as well as the father of Manitoba. 1870, Manitoba and Northwest Territories joined Confederation. In 1870, Manitoba and the Northwest Territories joined Confederation. 1871, British Columbia joined Confederation. In 1871, British Columbia joined Confederation. 1873, Prince Edward Island joined Confederation. In 1873, Prince Edward Island joined Confederation. 1873 RCMP was founded. After the first Métis uprising, Prime Minister Macdonald established the Northwest Mounted Police in 1873. Today, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, also known as the Mounties, serve as the national police force and are one of Canada's most recognizable symbols. 1880, Britain transferred the Arctic Islands to Canada. In 1880, Britain transferred the Arctic Islands to Canada. 1885, completion of the Canadian Pacific Railway and Northwest Rebellion. British Columbia joined Canada in 1871 after Ottawa promised to build a railway to the West Coast. On November 7, 1885, the completion of the Canadian Pacific Railway was marked when Donald Smith Lord Strathcona, the Scottish-born director, drove the last spike. The project was funded by British and American investors and built with labor from both Europeans and Chinese workers. 1885, Banff National Park was established. Alberta is home to 5 national parks, including Banff National Park, which was established in 1885. 1892, the Stanley Cup. The National Hockey League competes for the Stanley Cup, which was donated by Lord Stanley, the Governor-General, in 1892. 1898, Yukon became a separate territory. In 1898, Yukon became a separate territory. During the gold rush of the 1890s, thousands of miners flocked to Yukon, a period famously captured in the poetry of Robert W. Service. 1900, the White Pass and Yukon Railway opened from Skagway, Alaska, to Whitehorse. In 1900, the White Pass and Yukon Railway opened, connecting Skagway, Alaska, to Whitehorse, Yukon's capital, offering a scenic tourist journey through steep passes and bridges. 1905, Alberta and Saskatchewan became provinces. In 1905, Alberta and Saskatchewan joined Confederation, becoming provinces. 1914 to 1918, World War I. World War I took place from 1914 to 1918. 1916, Manitoba granted women the right to vote. In 1916, Manitoba became the first province in Canada to grant women the right to vote. 1917, Battle of Vimy Ridge. In April 1917, the Canadian Corps captured Vimy Ridge, suffering 10,000 casualties, but earning a reputation as the shock troops of the British Empire. A Canadian officer described it as the moment he saw the birth of a nation. April 9th is now celebrated as Vimy Day. 1918, women got the right to vote in federal elections. At Confederation, voting was restricted to property-owning adult white males, a norm in many democratic nations then. The women's suffrage movement, led in Canada by Dr. Emily Stowe, the country's first female physician, fought for voting rights. In 1918, most Canadian women aged 21 and older gained the right to vote in federal elections. 1927, the Peace Tower. The Peace Tower, completed in 1927 to honor those who served in World War I, houses the Memorial Chamber. Inside are the Books of Remembrance, listing the names of Canadian soldiers, sailors, and airmen who died in service or on duty. 1929, the stock market crash. The Roaring Twenties brought economic prosperity, low unemployment, and business growth. However, the 1929 stock market crash triggered the Great Depression, or Dirty Thirties, with unemployment peaking at 27% in 1933. Western Canadian farmers were especially devastated by falling grain prices and severe drought. 1931, Statute of Westminster. In 1931, the Statute of Westminster granted Canada legislative independence, giving the country control over its foreign policies and legal autonomy from Britain. 1934, Bank of Canada was established. Amid growing calls for a social safety net, including minimum wages, a standard work week, and unemployment insurance, the Bank of Canada was established in 1934 to manage the money supply and stabilize the financial system. 1939 to 1945, World War II. The Second World War began in 1939 when Adolf Hitler invaded Poland and conquered much of Europe. Canada joined its democratic allies in fighting to defeat tyranny, with over 1 million Canadians and Newfoundlanders serving in the war. This was a significant proportion of the population, and 44,000 Canadians lost their lives. 1940, women to get the right to vote in Quebec. Thanks to the efforts of Therese Casgrain and others, Quebec granted women the right to vote in 1940. 1944, invasion of Normandy. On June 6, 1944, during the D-Day invasion of Normandy, 15,000 Canadian troops stormed and captured Juno Beach from the German army, marking a significant national achievement. About 1 in 10 Allied soldiers on D-Day was Canadian. 1947, the discovery of oil in Alberta. The discovery of oil in Alberta in 1947 marked the beginning of Canada's modern energy industry. 1947, Canadian Citizenship Act. The Canadian Citizenship Act, which came into effect on January 1, 1947, created Canadian citizenship as a distinct legal status, separate from British subject status. 1949, Newfoundland and Labrador joined Confederation. In 1949, Newfoundland and Labrador joined Confederation, becoming Canada's 10th province. 1952, Queen Elizabeth II became Canada's Queen. In 1952, Queen Elizabeth II became Canada's Queen. 1960, Canada Bill of Rights was introduced. In 1960, the Canada Bill of Rights was introduced, marking a significant step toward protecting individual rights and freedoms. 1960, Aboriginal people gained the right to vote. In 1948, Japanese Canadians gained the right to vote, completing the enfranchisement of most Canadians of Asian descent. Aboriginal people were granted voting rights in 1960. Today, all citizens over the age of 18 are eligible to vote. 1960 to 1970, Quiet Revolution. French-Canadian culture thrived after World War II. In the 1960s, Quebec underwent the Quiet Revolution, marked by rapid social and economic change, with some Quebecers advocating for separation from Canada. 1965, Canadian flag was raised. In 1965, Canada raised its new red-white-red pattern flag, inspired by the Royal Military College flag. Red and white, historically associated with France and England, became Canada's official national colors in 1921. 1965. Canada and Quebec pension plans devised. In 1965, the Canada Pension Plan (CPP) and the Quebec Pension Plan (CPP) were established to provide income security for retirees, ensuring financial stability for Canadian workers in their later years. 1969 Official Languages Act. In 1963, Parliament created the Royal Commission on Bilingualism and Biculturalism, which led to the 1969 Official Languages Act, ensuring bilingual services in French and English within the federal government across Canada. 1970 The La Francophonie. In 1970, Canada helped founded La Francophonie, an international organization uniting French-speaking nations. 1971 Multiculturalism. In 1971, Prime Minister Pierre Trudeau declared multiculturalism as an official policy, recognizing and celebrating Canada's diverse cultural heritage. 1980 The National Anthem, O Canada. In 1980, O Canada was officially proclaimed as the national anthem, first sung in Quebec City in 1880. The anthem has different words for French and English Canadians. 1980 Marathon of Hope by Terry Fox. In 1980, Terry Fox, a British Columbian who lost his right leg to cancer at 18, began his cross-country Marathon of Hope to raise funds for cancer research, becoming a national hero in Canada. 1980 Quebec's first referendum on independence. In 1980, the movement for Quebec's sovereignty gained momentum, but was defeated in a referendum held in the province. 1982 Charter of Rights and Freedoms. In 1982, the Constitution of Canada was amended to include the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, which begins with the phrase, "Whereas Canada is founded upon principles that recognize the supremacy of God and the rule of law," emphasizing the significance of religious traditions and human dignity in Canadian society. 1982 Canada Act. In 1982, the Canada Act, also known as the Constitution Act, was passed, solidifying Canada's independence by ending British Parliament's ability to amend the Canadian Constitution and enshrining the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. 1982, Dominion Day was renamed to Canada Day. Until 1982, July 1st was known as Dominion Day to mark Canada's self-governing status. It is now celebrated as Canada Day. 1988, Canada started free trade with the United States. In 1988, Canada established free trade with the U.S., and in 1994, Mexico joined under NAFTA, North American Free Trade Agreement. 1988, Apology and compensation for Japanese Canadian internment. Earlier, Japanese Canadians in BC were forcibly relocated, and their property was sold without compensation, despite military and RCMP warnings that they posed little threat. The Canadian government formally apologized and offered compensation in 1988. 1994 NAFTA. In 1994, Mexico joined Canada and the United States in the North American Free Trade Agreement NAFTA, fostering economic cooperation and trade among the three nations. 1995, Quebec's second referendum on independence. In 1995, Quebec held a second referendum on sovereignty, which was narrowly defeated. The debate over Quebec's autonomy within Canada remains an ongoing and influential part of the nation's political landscape. 1999, Nunavut became a territory. In 1999, Nunavut became a separate territory, acknowledging Inuit land rights and creating a self-governing region in the Canadian Arctic. 2002, Queen Elizabeth II celebrated her Golden Jubilee. In 2002, Queen Elizabeth II celebrated her Golden Jubilee, marking 50 years as the reigning Queen of Canada. 2005, the Clarkson Cup. In 2005, the Clarkson Cup was established by Adrienne Clarkson, the 26th Governor-General of Canada, to honor excellence in women's hockey. 2006, the Quebecois recognized as a nation within Canada. In 2006, the House of Commons officially recognized the Quebecois as a nation within a united Canada. 2006, Canada apologized for the Chinese head tax. In 2006, the Government of Canada issued an apology for the head tax, a race-based fee imposed on Chinese immigrants between 1885 and 1923. 2008, Canada apologizes to residential school survivors. In 2008, the federal government in Ottawa formally apologized to former students of residential schools for the abuse and hardships they endured. 2010, Vancouver hosted the Winter Olympics. In 2010, Team Canada won the gold medal in men's hockey at the Winter Olympics in Vancouver. 2012, Queen Elizabeth II celebrated her Diamond Jubilee. In 2012, Queen Elizabeth II celebrated her Diamond Jubilee, marking 60 years as Sovereign of Canada. This concludes Chapter 1, Key Years in Canadian History. Watch this video again to reinforce your memory of the important dates and events, and boost your chances of passing the Canadian Citizenship Test on your first attempt. If you found this video useful, please like, share, and subscribe to Canada Dreamers. Thank you.